There's something in the woods, something creepy, and it ain't me this time, I swear. The woods are already naturally intimidating to humans' subconscious. Now throw in some unhappy spirits, curses, and even supernatural creatures, and you've got yourself an underworld of leaves and bark. Enjoy these 5 allegedly true scary stories about haunted forests. If you have a scary story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. Now, let's begin. Encounter with a shadow being in the woods, from Snowman 185. It's taken a long time for me to come out and be more public about this experience in my life, as I've repressed it due to a terrible and traumatizing experience. This experience happened in Hartington, Nebraska, during turkey hunting season in 2015. The specific plot of land that my friend Jackson and I were hunting on was labeled private because the hunting was really good there, and the owner of the land is notoriously mean and tight with who he lets hunt on the land. Luckily, and unluckily, Jackson is friends with the owner of the land we hunted. Since remembering this experience, it permeates in my mind with horrifying clarity. It was 5 o'clock in the morning when Jackson and I arrived at the beginning of the land, so that we could get to the spot where turkeys roost. Now, for folks who don't turkey hunt, these creatures are pretty intelligent, and the slightest sound you make might spook them, so you have to get to your post before they wake up with complete silence. Immediately, when I set foot on the land, I had a very uncomfortable feeling, but I eventually ignored it. I hadn't been back here in a year, so it felt much less familiar to me, thanks to the time gap. The process of hunting and getting our turkeys went very well, just like many times before in the past. After we both shot our turkeys, we picked them up and went to Jackson's grandparents' house to butcher and clean up the kills. After we got all that done, it was roughly 1 in the afternoon, and since Jackson wanted to go back to check his trail cam later at night, we decided to go get another memory card. The day after that was uneventful. We just did the same busy work at his grandparents' farm until dark. The whole time, I had this feeling in my stomach that I couldn't really pinpoint, and yet again, I chalked it up as random stomach problems that I often have throughout the day. Once it was dark outside, we began to make our way back to the plot of land with the trail cam. As we drove over there, I saw a flock of crows fly past. I took this as a bad sign, which made my stomach pains even worse. I turned right to Jackson, and I told him that we should probably go back. We could change the memory card another time. Jackson, being a generally rational and hard-headed person, insisted we go to the camera, because he wasn't going to be up in this part of the land for another 2 weeks. I reluctantly agreed, but I felt my stomach turn as we pulled up next to an abandoned corn crib. We began to make our trek up some hills to reach the camera. We discussed how lucky we were to bag our turkeys as quickly as we did earlier that day. We hopped the barbed wire fence and made our way up the hills. The woods were alive with forest critters doing what they do every day. Bugs whirring past you, squirrels scurrying up trees, and the occasional crinkle of leaves further into the woods. Coming up to about halfway to our destination, Jackson turns to me and says he has to go to the bathroom. Now that I thought about it, I had to go as well. We go our separate ways to do our private business. While walking through the trees alone to get away from Jackson for a moment, I couldn't help but notice that all the normal business of the woodland creatures all but ceased in a matter of moments. The moment I noticed this, the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. This prompted me to turn around and shout for Jackson to see where he was, to see if he noticed the same thing. I call 3 times at the top of my lungs, but I do not receive a reply. I end up deciding that I'll stop right there where I am, use the bathroom real quick, and speed walk back to Jackson. When I was carefully laying the guns I had on my back to the ground, I heard rustling in the woods to the left of me. I brushed this off as there are many deer in the area at the time of the year. I forgot to add that we both had headlamps with adjustable strengths of light due to it being nearly pitch black outside. After laying my guns down, I adjusted my lamp to the highest setting for maximum clarity of my environment. While I was adjusting the headlamp, I hear my name being called to the left of me. The way the voice sounded, it's hard to explain. It was like a mix of someone who smokes a pack of cigarettes a day, blended with nails on a chalkboard. Instinctively, I turned to my left, hoping it was Jackson, whose voice may have cracked for whatever reason. He did smoke cigarettes pretty heavily. When I turned, I saw what caused me to repress my memories for so long. I can only explain it as an entity of some kind that measured about 8 feet tall. It was running straight at me when I looked, but the figure was composed of complete darkness, like some sort of animated shadow. Think of the darkest environment you can. Relate that to the color of the figure I was seeing. The scariest part was that while it was running, it was not like any run you could do with 2 legs. Whatever it was doing was more of a scuttle, all the while making absolutely no noise. This is impossible due to there being dead branches and leaves littering the forest floor. When I initially saw this entity coming right at me, it was about 75 yards away, but I blinked once, and the distance instantly shrank to only 25 yards. Staring at this thing running towards me, I noticed that it had no distinguishable features, until it opened what appeared to be a jaw. Inside were hundreds of thin, sharp, needle-like teeth, tips glossed over with what appeared to be a red color, as if it had killed recently. While this thing was doing this, eyes protruded on its body from seemingly nowhere. These eyes were red with a hint of yellow thrown in. Struggling to breathe in my panic, I grabbed the 12-gauge Remington Super Mag and I fired in its direction 3 shells. My ears rang and I became briefly deafened. As I shook my head and looked back at the creature, it was still coming, unscathed, but I did notice a blister in the tree behind it. One of the shots that should have hit had gone straight through. I turned and ran, but I knew it would catch me. If something could travel 50 yards in the blink of an eye, I was honestly surprised that I wasn't dead yet. The entire time I ran, I could hear my name in that same voice as before, being called from behind me. At the same time, I began to scream Jackson's name, hoping that he would find me. After a minute or two, I finally hear him yelling my name to the right. I yelled back at him, but I was already so close to the truck that I just told him to pile in with me. I peeled out, and we left the hunting ground. Jackson had plenty of questions, but I wasn't in the mood to talk for a while. I don't go back to that hunting ground anymore. I'm too afraid to go back to that land, and I wish I had any idea as to what I saw that day, but I don't. There's Something in Glen Park, from DemonicFreak. Bear with me now, because this is going to sound outrageous. So there's this park in the States called Glen Park. Mind you, where I live, it's further north of the US, and since this is a smaller county, no one really believes in the supernatural, beyond being God-fearing folk. Not me, though. I'm more into herbal healing and feeling the connection with the earth itself. Anyway, back in high school, when I hung out with an old friend of mine, Claire, we started trying to be witches. and the two of us were quite interested in making something supernatural happen. This is where it gets interesting. One night, about a month after I'd moved in with her due to some issues at my own home, we took a walk over down to the town at night. Mind you, the area in which we live doesn't see a lot of trouble. Like I said earlier, it's a small county, and that means fewer issues. The only real problem this town had were some kids vandalizing the park, the same one we were heading to. I haven't been there since we were very young, and I wanted to see it again. It was the perfect, beautiful February night. We took a different route there, the back road behind the Dairy Queen by the apartment complexes. We soon came to the entrance of this bridge that led into the park. The bridge is a bit of a landmark, but if I were to say its name, then someone may know exactly where. You don't want to go here, trust me. The bridge was old, very sturdy. It was a cable bridge, so if you had a group of friends and jumped up and down on the bridge, you could move it about fairly well. 2 people, both of them rather small, can't move this thing on their own. Trust me, we tried to. That night was rather good for February. Still a wee bit chilly, but what bothered me was how dark it was. I'm not too fond of the dark, due to an incident I had as a child, so I clung to my friend. We were just talking as we headed across, but when we both were watching ahead of us, we saw something odd. Along the path to the park was a line of street lamps, the kind that produce yellow light that is somewhat faded. Further up the path, we saw movement, and as this thing moved, the streetlight it was passing under would go out. Just pop, not break. It would go out suddenly like the electricity was shut off. It got further down the path and stopped at the end of the bridge, where the other entrance was. The same entrance we were heading to as our exit. The large figure was clear, but the scenery moved around it like an iridescent reflection, almost like it was made of some sort of energy. And what was even more frightening about it was the sheer size of it. The archway where it stood was about 10 feet tall, and where its head was just beneath the cement arch. Both of us were speechless, frozen, scared out of our wits. Or at least I was. I couldn't take my eyes off of the thing. I wasn't sure how long I was staring at it for, but it stepped forward, and as it did, its 1 foot alone shook the bridge we stood on. By then, I heard Claire bolt away and run, leaving me there. I was frozen solid. I couldn't move, I was so scared. But yet, I felt strange. I felt more shocked at what I was seeing versus fearing what it would do to me. But that was when I felt a hand on my wrist, and I was pulled back into what was going on. Claire had come back, grabbed me, and forced me to run with her. As we ran, the bridge shook, and we heard a low, hollow roar coming from behind us. We ran and ran until we ran past the DQ and back onto the main road, where there were streetlights again. Claire let go of my hand and continued to stomp off back home. By the time we made it to her house, I had asked a few times why she was so mad. She turned around and yelled, "You nearly got me killed." I didn't say much, but I was more insulted that she was only worried about herself. The only thing I did do was head down to the basement, where I stayed for the night. I stayed up wondering why I wasn't afraid of it, and more so stunned by what it was. Was it even real? It's been 7 years since then. I'm still practicing healing in the power of 3, and since that encounter, I learned something. There are creatures and beings in this world that we don't understand. I doubt we ever will. But we need to respect them, because if we try to disrupt the balance, they will remove us if necessary. A Whistle in the Woods, from Kim Yosia. I've never done something like this, but after I told my classmate this story, she recommended I share it here. This story happened the summer of 9th grade. Me and 5 of my friends, G, S, A1, A2, and Big Juicy, were there. We called him Big Juicy because of a Snapchat story, sort of an inside thing. It was around 10:30 or 11 p.m. We were downtown walking past the cemetery and through the woods. We were really excited because we had just left another one of our friends' houses. We were headed to the mall because it was Friday night, so the mall didn't close till 1 a.m. We were deep in the forest, following a shortcut S had showed us. We were walking and having a good time until A2 stopped us. She said she heard something, so we all stopped and went quiet. A2 pointed straight ahead of us, at something with gray hair, and then I could see blue eyes and sharp nails. This odd animal was much taller than Big Juicy, the largest of our group, who himself was an enormous 6'7". It had a dog-like head but a human-shaped body. G told us that it looked like a bear of some kind, and it only appeared big because it was further away. Everyone else disagreed with him and wanted to turn around immediately. We looked back in its direction, and we saw the thing was gone now. The rest of us kept going, but me, G, and Big Juicy went back. We were walking when we began to hear heavy breathing behind us. A1, A2, and S ran towards us. They had seen the thing again and gave us a better description of it while panting. They honestly made it sound like a werewolf, but that's impossible. It's definitely just a bear, I thought. Big Juicy was mad, so we all followed him back to the spot the others claimed they saw it. When we went back, you'd probably expect me to say that it was gone again. It was still there, and now it had something in its mouth. Big Juicy started yelling and throwing things at it. He would later admit that this was a bad idea. The thing ran towards us. Of course, we panicked and began sprinting out of the woods. We hadn't even run a few yards, though, until we looked back, and it was gone again. We continued running, eventually making it back to the highway and to the mall, where we gathered to catch our breath and tried to debate at what we'd seen. That wasn't the end to this story. On our way back to S's house, we passed those woods again to see a dead animal of some kind. I have no idea what kind it was. We made it home safely, but we told S's 2 older brothers about what we'd seen. S's older brothers laughed in our faces and said they'd go check it out themselves to prove that we had just seen a weird-looking bear. By that time, it was almost 3:30 a.m., and S's brothers had just left. Half an hour passed when they rushed back in trying to get their dad's gun. We asked them frantically what happened. They told us that what they saw was this sort of giant wolf dog-looking thing. This was confirmation that what we saw was unnatural, and that we in fact did escape something that could have ripped us apart. We were sort of relieved, though, that we weren't crazy and someone actually did see what we saw. We stayed at S's house for the night. No one dared leave the house, at risk of seeing or running into the creature, even though we all live fairly close to one another. All of us saw something similar, but we all seem to believe it's something else. Some of us think it's a werewolf. Others say it's some sort of deformed bear. But do either of those explain how it could disappear so quickly? Be there 1 second and gone the next without a sound? I think it's something more ethereal, but definitely dangerous. The One Who Stalks Me, from Travis M. In January 2018, I was visiting my buddy up in Flagstaff. I moved him up there a year prior and was finally visiting. Well, while on my way up there, I stopped by his little brother's house and picked him up so he could come with us. The visit was going awesome. We went hiking, off-roading, shooting, and before I knew it, it was the night before I had to drive back. Well, something happened when we were off-roading and coming up to this hill in the middle of the forest. The Land Rover we were in sort of started sinking. We thought it was the sand, but it wasn't. All of a sudden, his air ride gave out, and we just thought, what the hell? We got out and started checking it out. That's when the wind began to pick up hard. I mean as hard as a hurricane. Not creepy, right? Then the birds went quiet. Same with the bugs. I have no idea why, but all of our attention was focused on the left, where there was an open field and more forest. It was about 200 yards between us and the field and the other side of the forest, where we saw a tall, slender figure with extremely long arms. It was running towards the other end of the woods and only took it a few seconds. After we saw that, we got the hell out of Dodge, going back to my friend's house. But at 3 a.m., after going to bed, my buddy's little brother woke up screaming because he said he saw something standing over me, staring down at my unconscious self. I'd never left a friend's house so quickly, and never have I been so terrified. Paranormal Experience at Nerd Camp from venusviolet. I attended an academic stay-away summer camp in North Carolina every summer for 6 years, despite living 500 miles away. In my second to last year, the camp had moved one of its programs to a different college campus. This college was a private Baptist school. The college was established in the mid-1800s and has some questionable history. It's notorious to the area, as many established KKK members attended the school and burned down an all-black elementary school in the 60s, killing several children. At the time of this event occurring, I was not aware of any of the questionable events of the past. Due to my personal circumstances, I actually arrived a night before the program began. There were plenty of staff members at the college, but my counselor wasn't one of them. She had car troubles earlier that day and wouldn't arrive until the next morning. This meant that I would be all alone on my floor. The girls that year would be staying on the 4th floor, the boys on the 3rd, the staff on the 2nd. This meant that there was only one person on the floor below me, and I was all alone on the top floor. The dorm I was staying in was built in the 60s and wasn't taken care of very well. Most things were stained yellow or faded from being over 50 years old. The floors and the doors were extremely creaky, but only if you had weight applied to them or they were touched. The doors smelled musty, like an old bookstore, and there was plenty of mold to go around. There was no air conditioning or heating systems. There were few outlets and worn-down locks on the windows and doors. The dorm had great acoustics, making it very echoey. I'd spent most of that evening unpacking and setting my room up. At around 10:30, I changed into pajamas and started to read a book to keep myself occupied. After all, the cell reception in the mountains was terrible, and I knew I wouldn't be going to bed anytime soon. Around 11:30, I heard the doors at the end of the hall slam shut, and the endless echo as it traveled down the hall. I went to look out the peephole and saw nothing. This was mildly unnerving because I knew I would have heard someone's footsteps leading up to the door slamming. The building is that noisy, and again, I was alone up here. That was the only unlocked hallway door on the floor. I soon distracted myself from that, trying to go to bed a little past midnight. I started to feel extremely scared for no apparent reason. The room simply felt heavy, and my heart began to pound. It felt like I wasn't alone. I wrote it off as the heat, considering it was early July in the rainforest of the Appalachian Mountains, and I had no air conditioning or fans. After a while of tossing and turning, and convincing myself to calm down, I finally went to bed. I woke up around 3:30 a.m. jerking into consciousness like I had just awakened from a nightmare. I instantly had a bad feeling like I was alone just before I'd fallen asleep. The room was extremely heavy and I could feel someone else's presence. My chest was extremely heavy and I could not find an ounce of courage in me to get up. I was paralyzed with fear, finding myself staring in the corner across from my bed. There stood a dark figure, which seemed to be of a frail person crouched in the fetal position, rocking back and forth. The entire time I remained in my bed, I couldn't take my eyes off of the figure. During this experience, I refused to move and took only shallow breaths. I knew I wasn't experiencing sleep paralysis, because I had experienced it before. I was able to move, I simply refused to. I was also being taken over with fear like nothing I'd experienced before. It felt like I was going to die, like I was hiding from someone else, being hunted by them. Looking back, I believe this was energy being exuded from that dark figure in the corner. It was oppressive. After laying there for probably an hour, I finally had the courage to get up. I darted into the bathroom and locked both doors, one leading to my suite mate's dorm. I sat in the bathroom for another hour and a half, pried between the wall and the toilet until the sun had risen entirely. I think it's important to mention that I was 16 at the time. Prior to this, I was skeptical of the supernatural. Ghosts, demons, spirits, you name it. I was raised atheist, raised by a family that believed in everything scientific. I had several friends growing up that were firm believers in ghosts and the supernatural. They'd often tell me about their experiences, but I never truly believed them due to my upbringing. I thought that they were highly imaginative and that they didn't always think about what the most rational explanation was. Yet, there I sat, questioning everything, feeling more fear than ever. After this experience, I was hesitant to even mention it to any of my friends at summer camp. I thought that they wouldn't believe me, just like I hadn't believed in my friends before, when they so wholeheartedly told me their experiences. After a week or so, I'd finally mentioned the occurrence to my friend. She was native to the area and had shared some of its unfortunate history with me, all of which I mentioned before. Something didn't sit right with me, though. The campus made me uneasy, especially the dorm I was in. Once I returned home, I did some research on the college. I simply looked up deaths associated with it. Like plenty of universities, there had been deaths occurring at the college, most of them being from alcohol poisonings, suicides, or car accidents. But there was one that truly stuck out to me. The case of a woman who had been assaulted and murdered in the mid-70s. The cause of death was from internal bleeding caused by falling from a height or being projected through a car window during an accident. The woman had been violated, and her body was dragged onto a nature trail located directly behind the dorm I was in. To this day, her murder remains unsolved. I firmly believe my experience was linked to her spirit. I believe the fear and hostility I felt in the air that night was the woman reliving how she had felt on her last day. I pray that this woman's soul reaches peace and that she is laid to rest, eventually given the justice she deserves. Well, stay out of the woods, folks. You're gonna get haunted, and not the funny ha-ha Ghostbuster style haunt. It's more like one of your bullies forcing you down and spitting in your mouth. Yeah, so best to avoid it. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. If you want to support the show, check the links below. There's a link to my Patreon and a link to my merch store. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode about 5 folklore horror stories. Himet Chan says, double-sided homework is more disturbing. True, true. That's when you trade your friend your fruit roll-up and have him do your homework instead. Pokemon Master 55 says, nothing like playing Borderlands 3 and hearing scary stories. Heck yeah, me and my wife and my brother already beat it together, but we're working our way through Mayhem 3 right now. We love it. Craig Edick says, gonna work out while listening to this one. Perfect timing. I enjoy hearing what you guys do while listening to these videos. It's pretty neat, and I'm glad I could help pass the time. Rico Hansen says, woohoo, been waiting on this one. Sending love from South Africa. Stay safe. Thanks kindly, Rico. You too. And I'd love to hear some South African horror stories sometime. And Finn Neubauer says, that image looks like Jerry on steroids. It's all fun and games until Jerry goes sicko mode. Tom better be ready for this one. Hey, quit ruining my childhood. I'm trying to spoil other people's childhoods. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, because more scary stories are on the way. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're awesome people. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.